Okay, we're actually on schedule with the actual syllabus. We're getting into Beowulf today, but before we do, or before I start, I've got to keep my phone out. If my wife sends me a text, I might have to stop class immediately, or if she calls, I will just start packing up and you can go. If I need to, I'll let you know about what's going on later. Okay, so couple of other just background considerations before we jump into the text. Actually, not a couple, it's like 5. These 5 issues, these aren't the only interpretive issues, but these are among 5 of the biggies, let's say, in terms of the kinds of questions scholars are still asking about Beowulf. Date of composition, we talked about that a little bit the other day, early, mid, late, and how that affects one's interpretation. I'll speak about that a little bit more as we get into it. 2, historically, and by historically I mean going back to the late 19th, early 20th centuries, there have been 2 big issues about the poems. I don't want to use the word spirituality, worldview. Is it pagan? Is it Christian? Is there a tension between those? A very famous article published in 1895 was by a guy named F.A., I can't remember what his first name is, F.A. Blackburn, The Christian Coloring of Beowulf. And what he meant by that is, we had this original poem, and then somebody came along later and kind of colored it in with crayons to make it look Christian, okay? One of the greatest scholars of Beowulf, a guy named, not Friedrich Nietzsche, Friedrich Kleber, a German who immigrated to the United States in the late 19th century, he wrote a response to that, arguing it's not colored in a Christian sense at all. The Christianity is there from the beginning, okay? So, this. How you answer this often is related to how you answer this, okay? This often will determine this, okay? Digressions and episodes. Why doesn't the poem just naturally flow from beginning to end? The scholar that I mentioned, Friedrich Kleber, he did an edition. I think the first one was in like 1912. Was like in 1912. Third one came out in 1950. That was the edition used in the United States up until about 2004 or so. Okay, the one in 1950 is called the third edition. The text is usually just called Kleber's Beowulf. His last name is Kleber. The fourth edition, done by a series of scholars, like I said, early 2000s, is just called Kleber's Fourth. Friedrich Kleber had nothing to do with that one. They just base it off his text, re-edit it, rewrite entirely the introduction, but following all of his chapters, so to speak. The introduction to his text, the 1950 text, it's 150 pages of very, very, very small print. I'm not kidding, you almost need a magnifying glass, okay? In that introduction, he goes into great detail about this problem and what he calls something like the halting lack of advance of the story. The story will start getting going, and it's like, oh, a shiny thing. And the poet takes us off to the shiny thing. Or, oh, a buddy, and we go off onto a digression. That takes us away from the main idea, or an episode. They're a little bit different. An episode is like a little sub-story within the larger story.
So like a B-story?
Kind of. One thing many scholars, early part of the 20th century, suggested was that these took away from the main story. What Kleber suggested, and I think he's entirely right about this, is nope. Every one of these little digressions and episodes, actually, to use the phrase that is way too overused today, and it's because of White House press secretaries, every one of these circles back to the main theme. And the main theme, like Tolkien said, is Beowulf and the monsters. Okay? 4, another issue. What constitutes a good king in this poem? Or another way of putting it, the poem might be suggesting what are the qualities one needs to be a good king. And the flip side of that, what are the qualities that make one a bad king? Because we see bad kings. In fact, a couple of them are actually called bad, evil kings. Not the kind of kings you want. And at least one of them is a real king. Not Helak, that I mentioned the other day, but a guy named Ergenrich, okay? An actual German emperor, so to speak, okay? So we'll talk about that quite a bit, because there is a phrase, let's see, right, I need to write it where I know everything is in the video. There's a phrase in the poem used 3 times, that was god kinning, okay? But in one of those 3 times, it has up before it. So twice it says, that was god kinning. That means, that's a good king, like exclamation mark. King. King. It's spelled C-Y-N-I-N-G, kinning, okay? The one time where you have ak in front, somebody else is being praised, but then the poet kind of takes us back to this main king that's governing this part of the poem, so to speak, and says, but that was god king, that is, but he's a good king too. It's kind of a damning with, or praising with faint damning, or however that phrase goes, okay? So what makes a king good, or what makes a king bad? And lastly, is the poem a single unified whole? And that gets back kind of to the composition idea. Was it written by a single author or composed by a single author? Okay? Late 19th century, when the early scholarship of Beowulf was being done, okay, there was a theory called the Lieder theory, Liedertheorie. Lieder means lays, like songs, little songs. Theory, the theory of little lays or little songs. And one scholar, a German scholar, they were almost all German scholars, suggested that Beowulf was actually composed of 20 or more little poems, little songs about this character named Beowulf and Hrothgar and monsters, etc., that get woven together sometime in the distant past. Nobody believes that anymore, okay? But there are many who say the Beowulf that we have is actually a conglomeration, if you want, of more than one story. I mean, if you look at the poem as it is, we have Beowulf versus Grendel, there's one story. Beowulf versus Grendel's mother, that's a second story, but they're very closely related. And then Beowulf versus Beowulf versus the dragon. Totally separate story. So many scholars say Beowulf versus what are called the Grendelkin or the Grendelkind. That's one major Beowulf story. Beowulf versus the dragon, that's another major story. Maybe, as one major scholar, I alluded to him last week, Kevin Kiernan suggests, those 2 traditions get joined together in the single manuscript we have. He argues the single manuscript version we have is the only Beowulf poem that ever dealt with Beowulf's rise and fall. And that the manuscript version we have, it's the authors. It's the poet composing it, okay? Not a consensus view. I would say probably if you were to take a vote, Anglo-Saxon scholars, that would be a minority perspective, so to speak, okay? We'll get to this in a moment, I hope. So, poem opens. Notice your book tells you there's a prologue. Why? Because in the manuscript, the poem is divided into what are called fits. F-I-T-T-S. You can think of fit like a chapter. Okay? Or in other poems like Dante's Divine Comedy, a canto, which means song. Okay? There are 42, I believe. Maybe a little bit, maybe 43. It's been a long time since I've looked into that actual structure. Pretty sure the 42nd one is not numbered. It's a weird thing. If you're into Douglas Adams and Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, 42 is the answer to everything. Well, 42, if I remember correctly, is missing. But it's divided into these. This opening 52 lines does not have a fit numbering at the top of it. All the others do. Okay? So, this is what you see if you were able to go to the British Library and look at the Beowulf manuscript. There's maybe half a dozen people in the world who can get access to it. So, notice there's nothing up above that. That's the actual top of the entire page that's left. And it's about this big. So, it has written in all what we today call capital letters or uppercase letters, what Wegardena in Yardogum, okay? What Wegardena. Let me back up for just a minute. Why do we call those uppercase? Anybody know? Well, capital means they're large.
Because wasn't it like when they had the printing press, the tiny letters would be on the bottom?
Uppercase, lowercase refers to printing composition tradition. In a printing well, you could almost use this. If we were setting up type, you would have a container like this, and you have a thing that closes, okay, like a briefcase. And the top part would be where all of the large letters are kept, what we call capitals. Those are the uppercase. All the lowercase would be down here, as would all the little spacing things to put spaces in between words. All of that has to be laid out, okay, in the actual type before anything can be printed. Not that way. At this point, this is called majuscule. The very large lettering is called majuscule. The letters underneath that, the smaller ones, are called minuscule. Small, large. So, it begins with what. Notice your text has an exclamation point after what. But there's no exclamation mark. But there's no exclamation mark after what in the manuscript. Anybody know why? They didn't exist yet. Exclamation marks don't come into existence until the Renaissance. Okay? As with quotation marks, question marks, semicolons, colons, those are relatively modern inventions. Okay? So, what? We have heard of the glory in bygone days, of the folk kings of the Spear Danes, how those noble lords did lofty deeds. Notice the verb tenses. They're all what? They're all past tense. We have heard, not we are now hearing. So what's the speaker, whoever the speaker is, saying? Y'all have heard these tales before. That's what the speaker is saying. We've all heard these. What are they? The glory in bygone days. Tell me if you can make that out. Year, dagum, this G through the change of the language becomes dagum, dime, die, Yard days of yore is what that is. Literally, that's what it is. Okay? So, we have heard of the glory in days of yore, which tells you a long time ago. This isn't yesterday. This isn't last week. It's not a year ago. It's not 20 years ago. Of the folk kings of the Spear Danes. Folk kings. People kings. Okay? Of the Spear Danes. We're going to get a whole bunch of different names for the Danes. Okay? We're going to get... This one is actually Gardana. Gar meaning spear. If you've ever been to the Nashville Zoo and going to the aquarium, or the Chattanooga Aquarium, I think has them too. Look at the garfish. They're just called gar. Why? They look like spears. Comes from that old English word, okay, of gar. So the folk kings of the Spear Danes. We're also going to have the East Danes, the West Danes, North Danes, the South Danes. How those noble lords did lofty deeds. Okay? So who is the speaker talking about? Is it talking about just us everyday common old Danes? No. It's talking about the leaders, the aristocracy, so to speak. And then the speaker goes immediately into oft shield Sheving seized the mead benches from many tribes, troops of enemies, struck fear into earls. Okay, that word oft, or often. What does it mean? Does it just mean multiple times? It might. Or it might mean always. It's one of the things about that word often. Today we make it to mean sometimes. More times than not, maybe. In an Anglo-Saxon period, or the Old English period, it could mean all the time. So, often or all the time. Shield Sheving.
Did they have another word for all the time, or was often their word for all the time? Because we say often, not all the time, but we also have...
I'm trying to remember just off the top of my head. There is one, but I'm drawing a blank as to what it is.
I mean, just knowing there is one.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure there is. Okay, so often shield Sheving, and a lot has been done. I could add another one up here. Name symbology, name symbolism. Shield Sheving. Sheving, the ing ending in Germanic literature, Germanic languages. When it's on a name, always means son of or descendant of. So, Schild, son of Chef. Well, chef is the Old English word for sheaf, like a sheaf of wheat, sheaf of grain. So, Schild, which means shield, son of sheaf. Early scholars, this is all about the seasons. This is agricultural language, and Shield Sheving must refer to a god, like the gods who protect and who encourage plant growth and all that kind of stuff. Okay? Nobody does that anymore. So, this guy often did what? Seized the mead benches from many tribes. Okay? The Old English. Mero setla, that's the mead benches. Mero, mead. Setla, a settle. You can still go to furniture places today and buy settles or settees, which is a thing you could kind of sit and recline on. Well, same thing here. So the mead benches, ofteia. Ofteia. User translates that as seized. It does mean taken. Took off. Took away. So does that just mean he comes in and says, can you please move so I can take your mead bench or bring it? He killed them. That's how he took away their mead benches. From many tribes. Troops of enemies. That is, battalions, platoons, armies, so to speak. struck fear into earls. And the verb that Lisa translates struck fear into is esoda. It means terrorized. Okay? Though he first was found a waif, he awaited solace for that. What's a waif?
Like waif, W-A-I-F, isn't that like a little kid?
But what kind of little kid?
Small,
All of my kids were little at one point, but none of them was a waif.
a weak one?
Orphan,
Oh.
abandoned, street urchin, so to speak. He wasn't a street urchin. He was a sea urchin, we're going to find out, but not the, spiky thing. So, though he first was found a waif, he was found parentless. He awaited solace for that. And the word that's translated solace is frofre, F-R-O-F-R-E. This word gets used throughout the poem. In fact, I think it's tied to one of the themes of the poem. And it means consolation. Or solace, as is given here. Comfort. Pick out another synonym for consolation, solace, comfort, relief. But relief isn't, it's not emphatic enough. It's not strong enough. He did what? He awaited solace for that, or consolation for that. He grew under heaven, prospered in honor, until every one of the encircling nations over the whales. What the hell's the whales writing? You've got a gloss. A condensed descriptive image of the sea, the writing place of whales. It's a kinning, okay? Over the whale writing, had to obey him, grant him tribute. So what does that mean? Until every one of the encircling nations, skip the long description, had to grant him tribute. Why did they have to?
Like his honor is undeniable.
What happens to those who don't pay him tribute? He takes away your meat benches. Meaning, as Harmon you're dead. Okay? Where? Those in the encircling nations. That is, all the surrounding peoples. So what is this telling us about Shield Chevy? The next half line. That was a good king. It's the first instance of that was good king. So, what makes a good king?
Someone who can go in and take, like, he can conquer.
He can conquer. Does he have to literally, physically, at this point, literally, physically conquer? Why not? Because they're already scared of him. And if they're already afraid, they're willing to pay gold or tribute to, it's like a modern mafia protection racket in New York. You pay the guys $100 a week, hey, nothing happens to your shop. Nothing happens to you. You forget to pay, you get a knee broken. That's why it's a protection. They're paying him for protection. Protection for what? Against him. Okay? So, he terrorizes his neighbors. He destroys some, because you have to do that in order to instill the proper amount of fear. So what makes a good king? What one word describes him? We talk about today politics and stuff. The strong, this is a strong man. Okay? You want to use dictator, tyrant, those are all fine. A boy was later born to him, that is to Shildshevin, young in the courts, whom God sent as, and there's that word again, as a frofre, as a solace to the people. So the speaker here, the poet, is saying, Shildsheving's boy was given by God, not Odin, not the All-Father, not the Sky Father, okay, was given by God for what purpose? To be a consolation for or to the people. That is, to bring the people comfort, to bring them relief, to bring them solace. He saw their need, the dire distress they had endured, lordless, for such a long time. Who's the he? Probably God. That's why he brings the son to Shield Sheving. Okay? Why? Because they had endured distress. Why? Think of the wanderer, think of the seafarer, think of the dreamer in the dream of the Rood. All three of them are what? Lordless. Because the people were lordless for a long time. Not while Shield Sheving is ruling, before Shield Sheving came. The implication is the people were without a lord. And this kid miraculously somehow arrived. We're going to find out later how he came, because he's going to leave the same way he came. Right? So God makes sure that Shield Sheving doesn't die childless. Because if he dies childless, the people are lordless again. So, the Lord of life, wielder of glory, gave him worldly honor. And then we get a name. Beowulf. Look at your footnote. Not the monster-slaying hero of the title, but an early Danish king. Many scholars argue that the original name was Beow. Just B-E-O-W. Okay? Modern word from that, bee. Okay? So, what is a Beowulf? Because the wolf part means wolf. Or the wolf part means wolf.
To become
What mammal bothers bees? A bear.
So he's
It's a,
Beowulf?
well, bear. It's symbolic of a bear. Okay? Which should tell us something about the name in those that it gets applied to. Yes?
So, I saw later on, and I'm not jumping ahead too
No, that's fine.
but that boars were considered holy. What's a different, did they have a different word for boar specifically?
Yes, they did. Boar is used. And I can't think of it. And the only reason I know that is because I'm familiar with some Germanic helmets that survive that have this thing along the top, which called on the ridge line. And there are boars on them. Eofor. That's it. E-O-F-O-R. Okay? I'm pretty sure that's it. I don't have a Anglo-Saxon glossary in front of me. So, this Beowulf is not the Beowulf supposedly that the poem is about. I say supposedly because it might be. It might be kind of compressing time. Shield Sheving had a son. Okay? And that son is the Beowulf of this poem. How's that compressing time? What's one of the other names or appellations, A-P-P-E-L-L-A-T-I-O-N-S, not the mountain chain, of Jesus?
Son of God.
Well, that goes back even further. And son of David. Is he the literal son of David? Like Solomon? No. Great. You can follow that through Mary. Grandson, okay? But still, son of.
So
This could be, possibly.
they might be related, but just saying that he's the son of this guy Shield Shifling that just sort of, cuts to the chase a bit.
Possibly.
Maybe across that they're related.
Possibly. Or possibly metaphorically he's the son. Because we are going to find out the literal name of the father of Beowulf. We're not going to find out his mother's name. Okay? So, this son of Shield, Beowulf, was renowned. His fame spread wide in Scandinavian lands. Interestingly, he's not referred to in any Scandinavian literature. No Old Norse literature that survives mentions a Beow or Beowulf as a son of Shield Sheving, okay? or of the what are called the skildungs. Shield, this is Old English. That's Old Norse, Danish, Norwegian, etc. Skjold, right? There was a whole tribe of skildungs, and there were skildung kings, etc. Yes?
Is shield shoving mentioned in old Scandinavian texts?
By this name. Not the shoving part, but skjold is, okay? I don't think the shoving part is. His fame spread wide in Scandinavia. What's meant by Scandinavian lands? If you've looked at the stuff on D2L that I posted before the semester began, I'm pretty sure I put up, there's a map there of northern Germany, Norway, Sweden. I don't think it includes Iceland because Iceland's out of the picture at this point. Northern Europe, the North Germanic lands, okay? He was renowned, his fame spread wide in Scandinavian lands. Line 20, we get a gnomic passage, a proverb passage, a wisdom passage. Thus should a young man bring about good with pious gifts from his father's possessions. Okay? So a young man can bring about good, can cause good to happen, somehow using his father's wealth. That's what's meant by the gifts from his father's possessions. So that later in life, loyal comrades will stand beside him when war comes. The people will support him. Okay? So skip the rest of that for a moment. That passage, thus should a young man to the people will support him, doesn't tell us anything about this Beowulf, son of Scyld. Because we don't know anything that Beowulf, son of Scyld, does. If the name Beowulf in the manuscript is an error and is only supposed to be B-E-O-W. It does, however, possibly describe the B-E-O-W-U-L-F of the entire rest of the manuscript. Okay? Because we're going to see that Beowulf, after he's been king, distribute treasure. The treasure is treasure he got from his metaphorical father, the men who were king before him. Okay? And he gives it to them so that when a day of strife comes, when a war comes, they can fight with him, for him, and defend him. And I'm going to give a little something away. All but one, run away. I mean, like Monty Python. Run away, run away, run away. Only one comes to his aid. And the speaker of the poem praises that one and damns the other. And I'm not kidding by using the word damn. I mean, he damns them. Okay? That exemplifies this passage. Thus should a young man, what? Distribute his father's treasure. What are we talking about? The term that we use for king or lord in the wanderer and the seafarer? The ring giver, the gold giver, the gift giver, you know, the gift stool. Well, the person who sits on the gift stool is the gift stool occupier, the gift giver. Okay? Now go down to the last line and a half of that first passage. With praiseworthy deeds, a man will prosper among any people. How do you prosper? Prosper means what? You are enlarged, you grow, people think more highly of you. How? By doing deeds that earn praise. That was god kinning. Those are praiseworthy deeds. What Skjold did, and apparently what his son did. So the speaker then says, Skjold passed away at his appointed hour. Notice, he doesn't die at the wrong time. Why? Because when you die, that's when you're supposed to die. I think this is actually the Old English word that's used there is the Fia one that I mentioned the other day. No, this one just says, at the shaping time. at the appointed time, at the time shaped for him. The mighty Lord went into the Lord's keeping. Word that's translated Lord there is Phreon, friend. But it's in this edition, who is this? I don't even remember who this is. Michael Alexander. It's capitalized. It's not capitalized in the manuscript. Okay? So, he died at the appointed hour. He went into the Lord's keeping. And so the poet gives us an example, a narration of how he is disposed of. Let's put it that way. Have to be careful with the terms I use. They bore him down to the brimming sea, his dear comrades, as he himself had commanded. That is, he gave instructions what to do with me when I'm dead. While the friend of the Scyldings wielded speech. The friend of the Scyldings. The Phreon, that means the Lord of the Scyldings. Who is that? Scyld. Okay? While he could still talk. The dear landruler had long held power. So, in the harbor stood a ring-proud ship. P-R-O-W. There are rings on the prow. Icy, outbound. We get a description of it. They lay him down in it. Okay? Dispenser of rings. And you're going to get all throughout Beowulf a lot of appositive phrases. A scholar named Fred Robinson, used to be at UT, Knoxville, wrote a book, a little small, slim book called Beowulf and the Appositive Style, okay? And what he's talking there is about how the poet uses apposition all throughout the poem. In fact, one of the things that Robinson argues is a lot of these episodes and digressions, they're large, like story-length appositives, standing to explain something else that's said in the story. They're like exemplars, all right? Parables almost. So, they lay him down, they put him by the mast, all kinds of treasure laid around him, adornments from distant lands. I've never heard of a more lovely ship, bedecked with battle weapons, war gear, blades, burnies. Burnies are like mail chain shirts and such. In its bosom were many treasures which were to travel far with him into the keeping of the flood just meaning the sea. With no fewer gifts did they furnish him there, the wealth of nations, than those did who at his beginning first sent him forth alone over the waves while still a small child. So when he was a waif, where did he come from? Where did they find him?
In the ocean.
In a boat. Echoes? Sound like anybody else?
Baby Moses?
Moses, who was found by Pharaoh's daughter in a little boat of bulrushes. And he became what for his people? Not only a deliverer,
A leader? A king?
a consolation. He brought solace to the Jews who were enslaved to the Hebrews. Why? Because God, through him, led them out. Okay? So, biblical parallel, biblical echo, biblical allusion, possibly. And we're told they set a golden ensign high over his head. We don't really know what that means. Normally that means like a flag with, an emblem that indicates something about the person there. And sent him off to the sea. Notice what the poet says they do not do. They don't do the flaming arrow, and as he gets 100 yards out, have their best archer.
See, what's the point in even doing a funeral if you're not going to do that?
Okay? Men do not know how to say truly, not trusted counselors, nor heroes under the heavens, who received that cargo. In other words, we don't know where he went. What also do they not know? Where he came from. Think of that passage in Bede, where the pagan priest, tells the story. Our lives are like a sparrow. We come from the dark. We don't know whence we came from. We have this moment of light, and then we go off to where we don't know. Fit 1. Let me back just one moment. This passage in Beowulf, yeah, Harmon.
When it comes to burial practices for them, would this have been considered like dramatically out of the ordinary? Would this have?
Nope, I'm just going to mention something, so hold on to that question. In 1938, just before the outbreak of World War II, a woman in, not Ipswich, trying to remember the exact little town, it's not Sutton Hoo, little town near Ipswich in southeast England, in East Anglia, Elizabeth Petty or Pretty, I can never remember, I think it's Pretty, Pretty. We would say Pretty, but it's pronounced Pretty if I remember right. Who owned a large amount of land that had burial mounds. She knew these were burial mounds because they were not natural. I mean, some of these are short mounds, like maybe the height of this ceiling and the width of this room. Nah, they'd be wider. The largest one, if I remember right, was about 50 feet tall and over 100 feet in diameter. In diameter. Okay. She hired a local archaeologist named Basil Basingstoke to dig one up, to do a dig. Okay. He chose the biggest one. And he got down there, dug down, he discovered a couple things. One, this mound had been dug into before, grave robbers, because people last few hundred centuries knew these aren't natural, people are putting stuff in them, so dig down deep enough, you might find gold and treasure. But they didn't go far enough. And we've got some of the early surviving photographs and such. He discovered there was a ship buried in this mound. Ship's about 90 feet long, and if I remember right, around 20 feet wide.
Was this burial mound far from the ocean?
Yes, it's inland from the ocean. The nearest body of water to it is the Deben River, which is 2 miles away downhill. Okay? So it's thought that when the ship was buried, they rowed it up the river, or sailed it up the river, to its nearest point to where they started digging a hole and moving the dirt. And then it was pushed up the rolling farm side on tree trunks, essentially, rollers. So for 2 miles, pushed and pulled, deposited, and then buried back over, right? In this thing was discovered, this is what's called the Sutton Hoo discovery. In this thing, as I said, was a ship. We're not sure, we don't know whether there was a body in it or not. One thing about English soil is it's acidic and it very quickly decomposes human remains. But there was an amazing quote-unquote treasure found. Merovingian gold coins. Okay, Merovingian, late 6th century, early 7th century. So late 500s, early 600s, right? Gold coins. Gold belt buckle. I think might be a picture of it in your book. It's about this long, about a little bit more than half as wide as this, and it's solid gold. And it has this amazing labyrinthine, what it's called, interlace pattern carved on it. Gold and garnet and gemstone jewelry, bowls. There's a big bowl, it's like almost 3 feet, big plate, about 3 feet in diameter, came from northern Egypt, Alexandria, Egypt, okay? Big, we would call them cauldrons, big bowls, etc. A sword, mail shirt, all this kind of stuff. So once that was discovered, because of English law, they had to determine who it belongs to. in order to determine who it belongs to, they had to have a coroner's inquest. That is, they had to have a court of law with a coroner to determine, is this grave goods or is it treasure? Grave goods meaning, was this buried with a person so that it would go with that person off into all eternity? Or was it put in the ground so that it could be later dug back up again? If it was put in the ground, according to English law at the time, if it was put in the ground so that it could be later dug back up again, then it's treasure and it becomes immediately the property of the crown. Okay? If it's grave goods, it becomes the property of the person who owns the property that it was found in. One of the main pieces of evidence that was used in that coroner's inquest was this passage from Beowulf. Because the things that are described here, it's eerie, folks. I mean, it's like to a T. Matches Skjoldskjeving's burial. The ensign, they found one of these, what we think is one of these. It's a metal spike-like thing. It's got like a 4, like this, and on each of these is like another spike for either sticking a candle on or sticking a pennant, a flag on, etc. That's there. Swords, all kinds of stuff, okay? So, coroner determines this is grave goods. This stuff was never meant to be dug up again. Immediately, it becomes the property of Mrs. Elizabeth Pretty. She turns it over to the crown. I mean, without any hesitation. She's like, I can't claim this. This is for all of us to see. So if you go to the British Museum today, they have a special section in the early medieval Britain just on Sutton Hoo. And that's where the majority of the original finds are. If you go to Sutton Hoo, it's a little difficult to get there, but if you go to Sutton Hoo, they've got this huge welcoming center, the inside of which is a reconstructed boat. Okay, just like this. Every now and then they have the helmet, part of the helmet that survived. I'll put it on D12 if I haven't already. Anyways, just showing this is taken as kind of literal truth for how some graves or some burials at least were done. And we know it's the case because there have been other ship burials discovered. Not in England, but on the continent. In Denmark, in Norway, in Sweden, etc. Okay? So, prologue is over. Now we get the first fit. Then Beowulf Skilding, notice the name, Beowulf Ing of Scyld, son of, descendant of Scyld, beloved king, was famous in the strongholds of his folk for a long while. So this guy lived a long time. His father having passed away, that is Scyld, until after him, after Beowulf Skilding, arose the great Halfdane, historical character. Okay? Halfdane was real. He's referred to in lots of stuff. Who held the glorious Skildings all his life, ancient and fierce in battle. Okay, I need to remove this. I've got posted on D12 a sheet of genealogies. And Liuza has a very similar genealogical list after the poem. So, Halfdane had several children. 4 children all counted up. Question mark on the 4th one. 4 children all counted up were born to that bold leader of hosts, Harogar, Hrothgar, and Halga the Good. So you have Harogar, Hrothgar, Halga, and unnamed daughter. Okay? But according to Norse literature, she is probably Yrsa. Modern version of that would be Ursula. Okay? So Hrothgar, Hrothgar, Halaga. I heard that, and then there's a blank in the manuscript. Was Onula's queen. We don't know why. I mean, your gloss tells you a name is missing from the manuscript here. It has been conjectured from parallel sources that it should be Irsa or Ursula. Okay? Keep going. The Swedish king Onula appears later in the story, causing much distress to Beowulf's nation. That's modern Roy Leusian Laetutis to say he caused, much distress. Like end of the world, apocalyptic distress. All right? So I heard that this person was Onula's queen. Dear bedfellow of the battle shielding. Battle shielding referring back to Onula. There's another example of that, a positive style. So, then success in war was given to Hrothgar. Wait. Halfdane has 4 children. He dies. Who should be king after him?
Firstborn.
Firstborn. Secondborn. Thirdborn. Fourthborn. Why is he king? We don't know yet. It's going to be alluded to later on. Success in war was given to Hrothgar, honor in battle, so that his beloved kinsmen eagerly served him, etc. Until the young soldiers grew into a mighty troop of men. And there's an implication here that the young soldiers not only grew into a mighty troop of young soldiers, but they also grew in age. Not they all became old, like me, but they just naturally developed through time. It came to his mind. Notice, and it's the same way in the Old English. The Old English doesn't say, Hrothgar thought. It's the thought came to him from out there that he's going to build a big old hall. Have men make a great meat house, which the sons of men should remember forever. And there within he would share everything with young and old that God had given him. Share, he would become a what? Gift giver. He would distribute everything. Notice what the poet says, that God had given him. So what he received, not, he's just out there, open hands, give it to me, God, But what he receives via his men through battle and such, he does what? He turns around and he gives it back. Notice the reciprocal nature of Lord and warrior relationship. Talked about this the other day. The warriors go out and fight the king's battle or the Lord's battle. They bring back treasure from that battle. And the Lord, a good king, this is one of the hallmarks, gives that treasure back. They have to give it to him first. Why? It's not theirs. Who are they fighting on behalf of? The Lord, the king. Okay? They're like vice presidents in that sense. A vice president has no power authority at all whatsoever in him or herself. It all comes from what? Being vice to the president. Okay?
Does this have anything to do with how dragons are portrayed as followers?
Yeah, very much so. Dragons are evil. Why? Because they're satanic. Later Christian theology of the Middle Ages has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with they don't use wealth for the purpose it is, according to Christian tradition, it is designed to be used for. Even in the early Germanic literature, and Beowulf is the earliest surviving Germanic heroic story written. Everything else comes from later than Beowulf. 1100 at the earliest. All right? So it's very much tied to that, which we'll get to later. So, he wants to build this hall. Why? So he can distribute treasure inside it, and so that it will be remembered forever. Okay, there's something else involved here. If the hall is going to be be remembered forever. And he's going to distribute gifts in the hall. What else is going to be remembered forever? Me, Hrothgar. People will be praising my name forever. Remember what both wanderer and seafarer say. What do you want to go on after you're dead? Your fame. The best word, the good word, is what prosperity says about you later. Okay? So, he's going to share everything both with young and old that God had given him. Comma, except for the common land and lives of men. In other words, Hrothgar doesn't deal in slavery. He doesn't take slaves. You can argue whether or not that's a good or bad thing. The bad part of it would be if he doesn't take slaves, then what happens to those who could become slaves? He deprives them of their mead benches. So, it came to pass swiftly among men, they build this big hall, okay, the greatest of halls. He gives it the name Heorot, which means heart. And you've got a gloss down there. An object recovered from the burial mound at Sutton Hoo is surmounted by the image of a heart. And the object that's found, it's about this long, and it has a ring on the top, and on the top of it is like a stick figure image of a stag. And the bottom of it has this little rounded cup-like thing. And it's been thought to be one of two things. You know, if a king is sitting like this, that little cup thing would fit naturally right on top of a kneecap. Like a scepter. The other possibility, because of how it's formed, a whetstone for sharpening swords. Okay? Be kind of weird to have a whetstone with a big old, this decoration on the end. So, what are we told? He remembered his boast. Go back to the wanderer. What's one of the bits of advice? Don't boast unless, there is an unless, you know how your mind will turn kind of when the situation comes. So he made this great boast, and what are we told? He fulfills it. Good king. Okay? He remembered his boast. He gave out rings, treasure at table, line 81b. The hall towered high and horn gabled. If you were looking at the hall, it would look like this. Would have these timbers, that's exaggerated, that would hang over like antlers. The hall towered high and horn gabled. It awaited hostile fires, the surges of war. Have they, excuse me, have they even had the ribbon cutting ceremony? I mean, has he come out there with the great big scissors? They've got the big red tape and he's getting ready to... No. And what is the speaker telling us? What's going to happen to this great hall? Channel your inner Donald Trump, the greatest hall, the hugest hall that's ever been built. What's going to happen to it? It's going to burn. Why? It awaited hostile fires, the surges of war. The time was not yet at hand when the sword hate of sworn in-laws should arise after ruthless violence. And you've got a footnote. The hall Heorot is apparently fated to be destroyed in a battle between Hrothgar and his son-in-law ENGL the Heathobard, a conflict predicted by Beowulf in lines 20, 24 to 69. That is, by the hero Beowulf. The battle itself happens outside the action of the poem. So a battle between a father-in-law and a son-in-law is what kind of battle? What term do we use to describe that? Civil. It's civil war. It's there used to be a TV game show, Family Feud. Okay? So what's going to destroy the hall? Another term, a Latin term, internecine warfare. A bold demon. Okay, now look at the structure of this. Hrothgar builds his hall, has his hall built because he doesn't have to lift a finger because everybody else is doing it because they don't want to be slaughtered by him. It gets decorated with gold, we're told, so that the roof shines from a distance, right? And the poet says, it's great, it's beautiful, but it's going to burn in fire because of hatred between father-in-law and son-in-law. Now, we don't know anything about that hatred yet. Act as if there isn't a footnote, okay? All we know is that it is in-laws, okay? The very next thing that's discussed is what? A bold demon who waited in darkness wretchedly suffered all the while. For every day he heard the joyful din loud in the hall, with the harp sound, the clear song of the shope. So Hrothgar gets his hall built, and then the poet essentially says, meanwhile, off in the murk, off in the shadows, off in the moors, but not off miles and miles away, off within what kind of distance? Hearing distance. This bold demon can what? Hear the singing. Okay? The bold demon. 86. The Ellen Gast. Ellen means bold, courageous, powerful, Gast. Gast doesn't. What do you think of when you hear the word demon? Immediately, first thing association.
The hellfire.
Hellfire. Fallen angels, right? Servants of Satan, so to speak. Not that kind of demon. I wouldn't use the word demon. I'd use the word spirit. Gast, modern English, ghost, is what that literally comes from. But we think of ghosts as what? Disembodied souls, or the things that remain afterwards. Okay? A bold spirit, let's say, who waited in darkness, wretchedly suffered all the while. Why? Because he hears the song, he hears the harp's sound. He who knew how to tell the ancient tale of the origin of men said, okay, that's a really long phrase. What does it mean? The person who could tell about the beginning of men.
He was there.
Have we heard of anybody like that? Have we read about anybody like that so far? One of the first things in Bede's ecclesiastical history. Whose story does he relate? Cadman. Cadman, sing to me. I can't sing. Cadman, sing to me. What shall I sing, Lord? Sing to me of the creation. I'm not saying this is Cadman, but there's a parallel. There's an echo there, all right? So, he who knew how to tell the ancient tale of the origin of men said that the Almighty created the earth, a bright and shining plain, by sea's embrace, set triumphantly the sun and moon to light their beams for those who dwell on land. That is, he made the earth for the sons of men. It's like almost right out of Cadman's hymn. Adorned the distant corners of the world with leaves and branches, made life also, all manner of creatures. Thus this lordly people lived in joy, blessedly, until one began to work his foul crimes. Who is this lordly people living and working in joy? Are we talking about Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden? Because the whole passage just before that's talking about creation. Nope. We're talking about Hrothgar and his people. They created a pretend version of paradise, so to speak. A perfect world, so to speak. They lived in joy blessedly until one began to work his foul crimes. A fiend from hell. In the Old English there, line 101, Fearna Freeman, Feond on hell. Feond, modern English fiend. On here means from. A fiend from hell. But what is meant by hell? Is it the Christian burning lake of fire and all that kind of stuff? Or is it the Germanic, really, really cold place? It's not clear. Okay? This grim spirit was called Grendel. And you could read John Gardner's Grendel, written in 71, 72, something like that. John Gardner was a novelist, poet, Anglo-Saxon scholar. He taught Old English. And if you read, I don't encourage, go ahead and read it. It's an interesting take. It's an adaptation. It's everything from Grendel's perspective. And it is a product of its time, meaning the early 1970s, late 1960s. It is this existential thing, I don't know other way to describe it, of Grendel expressing, existential angst. Why do these people hate me so much? Why won't they be nice to me? Et cetera, okay? The grim spirit was called Grendel. Grendel probably comes from the Old English verb grendon, meaning to grind. Yes?
Did you say that Grendel's name?
John Gardner. Gardner. You can get copies for pennies on Amazon. Grim Spirit was called Grendel, mighty stalker of the marches. Okay? All that means, mighty stalker of the marches, line 103. Mera, which means great. We get the modern English word more from that. Okay? Mera, great, strong, powerful. Merch, steppa. Erase who we shield in the Artigan. Mirch, that's the word from which we get both mark and march. Not march like, jackbooted Nazis and such, but march as in the territory out there that borders our land. In English, British English, you can use either term. The one with the K at the ending, it's northern usage like Scottish. Okay, they use a K where there's a ch in British English. The difference between Scottish kirk, K-I-R-K, and English church. Okay? So all this means out on the borders. What's a border?
Like where two different territories connect, run against each other.
Where two different areas merge.
Not intersect, but like an invisible wall almost.
Could be, yes.
If back in those days, it probably would have been a geographic one, right? Like a border would be like, okay, well, our land goes to the end of the march, or our land goes to the rear.
Or goes to the march, or marsh is another name for this in a different context. And the others goes to the marsh, and the marsh is the borderland in between the two.
The area no one wants.
Yeah, except this is the area that Grendel inhabits.
It's not great.
Okay.
Does it ever describe what Grendel looks like?
Yeah, we get some. Not like any of the things in the various movies. Don't watch any of the Beowulf movies. They're all absolutely horrible. He held the mighty stalker of the marches who held the moors and fens. Held means he rules there. Why? Well, you're just your happy-go-lucky Hrothgarian, fellow of Hrothgar's kingdom, court, etc. And, you go out in the marshes and fens, what's going to happen to you? Grendel's going to get you. Grendel's going to eat you. So he rules it
because nobody else goes in there. All right? This miserable man. So, demon, fiend, man. 3 different terms. Lived for a time in the land of giants. I think that's etanos in the Old English. Not Fivelkinus, okay? Lived in the land of giants. Where is that? No. Now, one of those Anglo-Saxon tribes that came in, the Jutes. Jute is an Anglo-Saxon word. It's one of 2 Anglo-Saxon words that can refer to giants. What we think of as, really tall people. The other one is Eotenas, all right? Eotenas. He lived in the land for a time in the land of giants. After the Creator had condemned him among Cain's race. When he killed Abel, the eternal Lord avenged that death. Okay, time out. Direct biblical allusion.
Is this the coloring in with the Bible that was mentioned earlier?
Could be, okay? Or is it integral to the poem? So, lived for a time in the land of the giants after the Creator had condemned him, what? Among Cain's race. That means Grendel is descended ultimately from whom? Cain. Okay? Go back to the Old Testament. It is from Cain, it is suggested, more so in Jewish mythology than strictly speaking the Old Testament, that the giants, the Nephilim, come from Cain. They also come from when the sons of God go into the daughters of men. The sons of God, a euphemism for supernatural beings, angels, fallen angels. Okay? He condemned him among Cain's race. Why? Because what happened to Cain? There's a mark put on him, some kind of mark. It's never described in the Old Testament to indicate Cain, don't kill. Cain has to go throughout his whole life bearing this mark of guilt, so to speak. And then we get this part. When he killed Abel, Cain killed Abel, the eternal Lord what? Avenged that death. Why did God avenge Abel's death?
First step.
Well, it is the first death. Kin? Who's Abel to God? God, Adam, Eve, son of Adam, Cain, Abel.
So he is a descendant.
Son of Adam, son of God.
Grandson.
Go look in the genealogies. Adam is referred to as a son of God because of having been directly created by God, which makes Abel a relative. Duty to Lord, duty to kin, duty to avenge one's Lord and kin. God is acting in a perfectly Anglo-Saxon fashion here. Okay? No joy in that, and then we get the word, feud. Cain began a feud by killing Abel. He began a feud with whom? God. Yeah, not smart. Pick on somebody your own size, so to speak, you know. And so God does what? God retaliates. After all, vengeance is mine, says the Lord. No joy in that feud. The Maker forced him far from mankind for his foul crime. Cain is the one that the Maker forced far from mankind. From thence, Cain, out there, because notice where Cain is not. He's not around all us good, upstanding folks. He's an outcast, okay? Haven't talked about this. What does outcast mean?
Cast
Or outlaw?
Cast out,
It means literally be cast out. Why? Because you're an outlaw.
not part of society.
That's what happens when you get cast out.
Vanished.
Banished, that's what happens. Because you broke the law, therefore the law no longer does what for you?
Protects you,
Bingo.
benefits you, protects you.
The law is a protection for those who follow the law. You don't follow the law, and the law then becomes what? Rather than a sword protecting you,
It's against you.
it becomes a sword coming after you. That's why when you are an outlaw or an outcast, anyone can do anything against you without any fear of the law doing anything to them. Okay? That's why it's dangerous to become an outlaw. So, from thence arose all misbegotten things. Name the misbegotten things. Our poet does. Trolls and elves. Let's see here. Thanon untidras eala on wolken. From thence, unnatural things awoke, or came to be. Eatanas, giants is what that means. And Ilva, Y-L-F-E, elves. This is where elves come from. And Orkneas, these are Tolkien's orcs, essentially. Swilcha gigantus, giants, but that form of it comes from Latin or Old French. It's not native Anglo-Saxon. Those who against God strove for a long time. Okay? Also the giants who strove against God for a long while, he gave them their reward for that. And you've got another footnote. Poet lists a collection of Germanic, classical, and biblical horrors. All are ultimately traced to their biblical roots, though the characters in the poem are not aware of this. How do we know that? That's an assumption on Lewis' part, that the characters in the poem aren't aware of this. And that's because part of the assumption is this passage is speaking directly to the audience hearing the poem rather than to the people within the poem. That the people within the poem know nothing about Cain and Abel. I think that's a big assumption. Okay? So, God gave them their reward for that. That is, gave the monsters, essentially, their reward. Fit 2. Time is it? 9:57. When night descended, he went to seek out the high house. He who? Grendel. To see how the ring Danes, there's another term for the Danes, had bedded down after their beer drinking. 117. After their bear thea, okay? Their beer party, if you want. Notice when Grendel comes. 2 qualifications. 1, it's nighttime, and 2, they're drunk.
They're blackout drunk.
The poet is going to say repeatedly, either directly through the poet's narrative voice or through a character like Beowulf, right? That you can count on the Danes for one thing, if nothing else. Night comes, they're drunk, man. They just love to drink. So, he found therein a troop of nobles asleep after the feast. And there's a reason why they're asleep. They knew no sorrow or human misery. Why not? Does the phrase dead to the world mean anything to you? As you said, they are blackout drunk.
Nothing else matters, just
You go up to them, smack them upside the head. They're not waking up. Okay? It's important to get this. The unholy creature Grim and ravenous, was ready at once, ruthless and cruel, and took from the rest 30 thanes. Okay? Thence he went, rejoicing in his booty, his reward, his treasure, back to his home, to seek out his abode with his fill of slaughter. Does that mean when he goes in the hall, so imagine, the hall looks like this, long, narrow, doorway here, and so you got 30 guys there, that he goes in and, chomp, 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 and just goes down the line like a smorgasbord.
Just take from them.
The implication is he grabs them all.
Just
Just sweeps them up.
So how big is he? He's not as tall as the ceiling. He's not Hagrid from the Harry Potter stories.
I mean,
He's
he's able to get in the hall and
big.
walk out while carrying a bunch of people. I don't maybe he's got him on a sled or something.
We're never told his actual size. So, but he carries them back to his home with his fill of slaughter. When in the dim twilight just before dawn, Grendel's warfare was made known to men, their lamentation was lifted up after the feasting, a great mourning sound. Okay, is that supposed to be M-O-R-N-I-N-G or M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G?
I picked the latter.
I think it's supposed to be M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G. I think that's a typo, but I'm not 100% positive. What is it in the Old English? 129. Morning song, M-O-R-N-I-N-G. It doesn't have the other spelling, the other word for the other spelling. So, unhappy sat the mighty Lord. Who's the mighty Lord? Hrothgar, okay? Unhappy sat the mighty Lord, long a good nobleman. He suffered greatly, grieved for his saints. He sorrows for their deaths. Once they beheld that hostile one's tracks, the accursed spirit. That is, they go into the hall, they see whatever remains, and then they see Grendel's tracks leading away. Probably with a trail of blood and gore and body parts, etc. The accursed spirit, that strife was too strong, loathsome, and long. That strife. What strife?
Pain, suffering.
Whose? Hrothgar's. Hrothgar's.
He was supposed to protect them.
He's supposed to protect them. He was, earlier, when the hall was being built, he was this great mighty warrior who attracted men from everywhere to come to his banner, so to speak. And now, not so much. Okay? We don't know how old he is yet. It was no long wait, but the very next night, Grendel comes knocking again. And he committed a greater murder, more not at all, for his feuds and sins. He was too fixed in them. In other words, it's too late for me. I'm just going to be rotten, Then it was easy to find a Thane who sought his rest elsewhere, farther away. It's like Hrothgar says, anybody want to sleep in my hall tonight? And they're like, we'll take the Motel 6 down the road. A bed in the outbuildings, when they pointed out, truly announced with clear tokens, thought that hall Thanes hate. Notice Grendel is now described as a hall Thane. A hall Thane is one who lives in and serves in the hall.
Did you take one over?
He took this one over, at least at nighttime. He who escaped the fiend held himself afterwards farther away and safer. So he ruled. He. Who's the he? Grendel. And strove against right. One against all until empty stood the best of houses. And so it was for a great while, for 12 long winters. Anglo-Saxon Germanic tribes counted time by winters. Okay? What? The Lord of the Scyldings suffered his grief, every sort of woe, great sorrow. When to the sons of men it became known, carried abroad, sad tales, Grendel strove, long with Hrothgar.
Is he killing 30 people every night for 12 years?
Well,
That's what some of us think. I think that's the case. it's not clear. It is clear every night for 12 years. So 365 times 12.
Take someone.
He takes control of the hall. Now it might be after the first 30 are dead, they wise up and, Motel 6 is crammed, so to speak. And he doesn't have to kill anybody else. But I don't think the poem implies that at all, right? So what have we been told at the end of that passage? Word now goes where? All the surrounding countries. Herod is haunted. I think I would use the word haunted, because you only are haunted, places are proverbially only haunted at night, not during the day. In that Grendel strove along with Hrothgar, bore his hatred, sins and feuds for many seasons, perpetual conflict. To me, that implies there's at least one damn fool who goes in every night and says, I'll fight him.
Yeah.
And he wanted no peace with any man of the Danish army, nor ceased his deadly hatred, nor settled with money. We'll have to stop there. It's 10:05. So we'll pick up at 156. Put a
So
note to
Brindle's just
myself.
got squires' rights.
Pretty much,
And
but only at night.
for 12 years, no one is like able to like get like a civil army and go there at night and deal with him.
Fair. They took out 30 guys. Really hard to involve.
Yeah, but they were all drunk. I feel like, I don't know, like
That's the problem throughout the poem.
Everyone
Everyone
just
just
gets
seem
drunk.
like he knows that other people have tried and where they have failed.
Beowulf's going to come in and he's going to read the Danes the riot act. He's going to so put them down. He's going to challenge and question their masculinity. To me, it's just utterly mind-blowing. When I raised this on a Anglo-Saxon discussion board, man, 25 years ago, you would think I'd said Beowulf was gay or transvestite or something, because the hatred that I got from literally around the world. I mean, it was like, how dare you say that? And I'm like, read the damn poem as it's written.
Yeah, he's like, I will do this without a shield.
And there are about a half dozen major Beowulf scholars who are like, Ted, you're onto something there.
Okay, so just to be clear, because I just want to make it drag out this. Grendel goes in at night when everyone's drunk. He takes 30 people, and then comes back every night and just gradually takes over the mead hall
At night.
at night.
Well, it's not gradual.
It's all.
Okay, all at once.
It's like they see the sun setting and they're like, let's leave.
I mean, I feel like it'd be pretty easy to like not worry about him. Like, I guess, I don't know, they got their whole thing about like your vengeance for 30 people, but yeah, I don't know.
Well, these are people that obviously take pleasure in being in their hall, so like,
Well,
why would they?
Remember what I said the other day about, and I'm going to reemphasize that again on Wednesday, how important the hall is everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're not just gonna like.
It'd be like
Lying down.
if 9/11, as bad as it was, rather than take down the two towers, imagine it took out the White House, the Capitol, Pentagon, Supreme Court. If
Yeah.
they just destroyed D.C. I mean, some of us would go, yay. Others would say,
Yeah.
At that time.
what would that do to America? I mean, think if it took out D.C.
Yeah.
Government gone, okay? So that's kind of the situation Hrothgar finds him in. He's still king, yay,
Yeah.
but he can't rid his kingdom of this evil.
Yeah.
So what good does it be to be king?
Yeah. All right. Have a good week.
Thank you.